Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to What Do We Know, a podcast dedicated to education through discussion. As always, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today as we look at the unpleasant reality of child abuse, part 2. Everyone should be against it, but do you understand what falls under the umbrella of abuse? Do you know how to spot it? And most importantly, do you know what you could or should do about it? And yes, I do mean legally. We're not trying to get anyone arrested at this point. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to recap on a few things that we discussed last time. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off the top, and then we'll get back to where we left off last week. Twins. Thank you, Bam. Yes. My beard is a little more magnificent, though.
So, definitions we're going to start off. Child abuse or child maltreatment is the physical, sexual, or psychological maltreatment or neglect of a child or children, especially by a parent or caregiver. Child abuse may include any act or failure to act by a parent or caregiver that results in actual or potential harm to a child, and can occur in a child's home or in organizations such as schools or communities that the child interacts with. The terms child abuse and child maltreatment do get used interchangeably, although some researchers make a distinction between them, treating child maltreatment as kind of an umbrella that covers neglect, exploitation, and trafficking as well.
Hey, Mara, thanks for joining. Also, Gold, thanks for the host, by the way. Now, moving on, child neglect is a form of child abuse and is a deficit in meeting a child's basic needs, including the failure to provide adequate health care, supervision, clothing, nutrition, housing, as well as their physical, emotional, social, educational, and safety needs. There's a lot of needs here. Society generally believes there are necessary behaviors a caregiver must provide in order for a child to develop physically, socially, and emotionally. Yes, stop. Really? Is this the time? There's about to be some cat abuse. Causes of neglect may result from several parenting problems, including mental disorders, substance abuse, domestic violence, unemployment, unplanned pregnancy, and poverty, even. Yes, Duppy. Hold on, because I know a lot of people are like, who is this Dup you speak of? This is a beautiful girl that is always trying to get my attention every time.
Mm-hmm.
Are adorable. Now, child abandonment. Yeah, child abandonment is a practice of relinquishing interests and claims over one's offspring in an extra legal way with the intent of never again resuming or reasserting guardianship over them. Typically, the phrase is used to describe the physical abandoning of a child, but it can also include severe cases of neglect and emotional abandonment, such as in the case of a parent who fails to offer financial and emotional support for his or her child over a long period of time. An abandoned child is referred to as a foundling as opposed to a runaway or an orphan.
There you go. And then now we're going to kick into what was left of the original podcast, where we left off on the effects of abuse. Uh, Next section we're going to go into is psychological abuse. So children who have a history of neglect or physical abuse are at risk of developing psychiatric problems or disorganized attachment style. In addition, children who experience child abuse or neglect are 59% more likely to be arrested as juveniles, 28 more likely to be arrested as adults, and 30% more likely to commit violent crime. Disorganized attachment is associated with a number of developmental problems, including dissociative symptoms, as well as anxiety, depressive, acting out symptoms. A study by Dante Cacchetti found that 80% of abused and maltreated infants exhibited systems of disorganized attachment. While when some of those children become parents, especially if they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative systems, and other sequelae of child abuse, they may encounter difficulty when faced with their infant children's needs and normative distress, which may in turn lead to adverse consequences for their child's social emotional development. Additionally, children may find it difficult to feel empathy towards themselves or others, which can cause them to feel alone and unable to make friends. Despite these potential difficulties, psychosocial intervention can be effective, and at least in some cases, in changing the ways maltreated parents think about their young children. Victims of childhood abuse also suffer from different types of physical health problems later in life. Some reportedly suffer from some type of chronic head, abdominal, pelvic, or muscular pain with no identifiable reason. Even though the majority of childhood abuse victims know or believe their abuse is or can be the cause of different health problems in their adult life, for the great majority, their abuse was not directly associated with those problems, indicating the sufferers were most likely diagnosed with other possible causes for their health problems instead of their childhood abuse.
Now, one long term study found that up to 80% of abused people had at least one psychiatric disorder at age 21, with problems including depression, anxiety, eating disorders, suicide attempts. One Canadian hospital found that between 36% and 76% of women mental health outpatients have been sexually abused, as had 58% of women and 23% of men schizophrenic inpatients. A recent study has discovered that a crucial structure in the brain's reward circuits is compromised by childhood abuse and neglect and predicts depressive symptoms later in life. Yeah, stop. Do you want up or do you want down? Or do you just want in between? In the case of 23 of the 27 illnesses listed in the questionnaire of a French INSEE survey, some statistically significant correlations were found between repeated illness and family traumas encountered by the child before the age of 18 years. Now, according to Georges Menahem, the French sociologist who found out these correlations by studying health inequalities, these relationships show that inequalities in illness and suffering are not only social. Healthy inequality also has its origins in the family, where it is associated with the degrees of lasting affective problems, lack of affection, parental discord, prolonged absence of a parent, or serious illness affecting either the mother or father that individuals report having experienced in childhood. And many children who have been abused in any form develop some sort of psychological problem. These problems may include anxiety, depression, eating disorders, OCD, codependency, or even a lack of human connections. There's also a slight tendency for children who have been abused to become child abusers themselves. In the U.S. in 2013, of the 294,000 reported child abuse cases, only 81,124 received any sort of counseling or therapy. Now, treatment is greatly important for abused children. It helps them deal with these emotions, what's going on in their lives, helping them understand that these things, among other things, is not their faults. So it really is key. It's instrumental. Now, on the other hand, there are some children who are raised in child abuse, but who manage to do unexpectedly well later in life regarding the preconditions. Such children have been termed dandelion children, as inspired from the way that dandelions seem to prosper irrespective of soil, sun, drought, or rain. Such children, or currently grown-ups, are of high interest in finding factors that mitigate the effects of child abuse. I'm going to get to some comments real quick. Gold said, I'm not sure if you guys discussed this or are going to, but I think it's important to differentiate between intentional and unintentional abuse by parents. We did.
I think it's covered
yeah.
somewhat by neglect.
Yeah, we did cover that. There's definitely instances, poverty and other things that definitely aren't like an intentional thing that you're putting a child through, but definitely affect a child. Neglect, of course, being one of the main things. And it's not always intentional. So we did cover it. If you want, before we end, we could probably touch back on some of that a bit later.
Yeah, it's mostly, I think, what relates to that's going to be neglect and caregivers other than the parents doing something and you're just not aware that it's going on. If you leave them with a babysitter and something's happening, or a daycare and something's happening, or a trusted family member something's happening, it can be
Right.
difficult to know because the children don't always know that they can share that type of thing. So now we come to the effects of abandonment. They include the possibility of experiencing abuse and neglect and institutionalized care, low self-esteem stemming from feelings of guilt about being at fault for being abandoned, separation anxiety, feelings of anxiety about being separated from parents or caregivers, attachment issues, which is difficult becoming emotionally attached and trusting other people, especially caregivers,
I suffer that with
abandonment
Top.
issues. Abandonment issues characteristic of abandoned child syndrome, including social alienation, guilt, anxiety, clinginess, insomnia, nightmares, eating disorders, anger issues, depression, substance abuse, and traumatic reenactment through romantic relationships. I was curious, Gold, do you have any insight as far as eating disorders from abandonment? I don't know when that manifests, if that's a child thing or if it's a adolescent or adult thing where that can be traced back.
I do know for some of those, some of these I definitely recognize a little bit of myself. Some.
Clinginess for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Social alienation. Sometimes I'm not always comfortable going out, and I have to really be comfortable with someone before, I'm ready to open up. A lot of the times, which I have been working on. I did feel guilty. Parents got divorced. It wasn't like abandonment, but it definitely, going through a divorce would be another thing that's an unintentional thing. I was 13 at the time, and the courts were like, you have to decide basically which parent you love more. You decide who you get to live with. a really terrible
Right.
position to put a child in from, my point of view. So some of these are
Well,
relatable. Gold said a lot of insight. It's different for every person. In general, a lot of my ED clients, which would be eating disorders for anybody wondering, has
totally
some
went the wrong way with that.
has some type of childhood abuse perpetuated by society and lifestyle choices, adult relationships. She said it's very complicated, which I'd have to agree.
I
Every
can
person
imagine.
is wired so much differently, so one thing impacts another thing. It's got to be difficult narrowing it down, but I'm sure, as she stated, it's definitely there. So, if you can think of anything else that you want to add, Gold, by all means, just shoot your comments out. We'll get to them as soon as we can.
Yeah, definitely. Then we're going
Uh,
to keep on going with a list of
yeah,
abandonment effects. We got symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, referred to as post-traumatic stress disorder of abandonment. They're going to run out of letters soon with these acronyms.
no kidding.
Uh, Depending on the severity of their symptoms, children who have developed certain maladjusted tendencies in social interaction may be diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder or disinhibited social engagement disorder. For children who are abandoned in dangerous places such as dumpsters, doorsteps, or other public areas, exposure to the elements and physical injury is also a distinct possibility.
Had to get that vape in real quick. Now we're going to move on to the effects of neglect. Effects of child neglect can differ depending on the individual and how much treatment is provided. But generally speaking, child neglect that occurs in the first 2 years of a child's life may be more of an important precursor of childhood aggression compared to later neglect, which may not have as strong of a correlation. Children who suffer from neglect most often have attachment difficulties, cognitive deficits, emotional behavioral problems, and physical consequences as a result of neglect. Now, early neglect has the potential to modify the body's stress response, specifically cortisol levels, stress hormones, which can cause abnormalities and alter the body's overall health. Stress is a real thing, I want to point out. It is a very real thing, and even with adults, even if you didn't deal with it as a child, stress is a huge thing, and it wreaks havoc on the body. It really does. Now, research has shown that there's a relationship between neglect and disturbed patterns of infant caretaker attachment. If parents lack sensitivity to their baby's needs, the baby may develop insecure, anxious attachment. The neglectful behavior the child experiences will contribute to their attachment difficulties and formation of relationships in the future, or even the lack thereof. Now, in addition to biological and social effects, neglect affects intellectual ability and cognitive academic deficits. Children who suffer from child neglect may also suffer from anxiety or impulse control disorders. So if you kind of see those kids, if you're ever like out at a restaurant or something like that, and they just throw a plate on the ground or something, they kind of lack that ability to. Everybody has those feelings like I want to do this, but they know, oh, this probably isn't the right time to do it, but they'll do it anyways. So impulse control is definitely a big thing there. Another result of child neglect is what people call failure to thrive. Infants who have deficits in growth and abnormal behaviors such as withdrawal, apathy, and excessive sleep are failing to thrive rather than developing to become healthy individuals. There was a study done by Robert Wilson, a professor at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, and his colleagues that showed for the first time that children under the age of 18, when they were moderately neglected in some manner by their caregivers, had a 3 times likely risk of stroke over those with moderately low levels after controlling for some common risk factors. They interviewed 1,040 participants aged 55 or older. After 3.5 years, 257 of them died and 192 were autopsied, with 89 having stroke evidence upon autopsy, and another 40 had a history of it. Neglect, bullying, and abuse have previously been linked to changes in the brain's gray matter and white matter and to accelerated aging. Now, let's see. Carrie said it's true. Stress is debilitating. It really is. Gold said it's very common for a parent to have their own dysfunctional relationships with their own bodies and self esteem that get passed on to the kids. Even as simple as a mother being obsessed with weight loss or constantly dieting can create an ideal for the child that they need to be like that as well. They grow up restricting food because mom did it, and it creates an unhealthy relationship with food and things like low self esteem, body dysmorphia, etc. Um,
I will say, my mom's here visiting at the moment, and we went out to our rehearsal dinner. And great Italian place, fantastic food. But she's sitting there. She ate half of her lasagna, and she's like, "Well, I'm full. I'm not going to eat the rest." And I turned and said, I have to say this. There are starving children in Cuba that would love to have that food. And she just laughs at me because she used to tell me that all the godforsaken time. And I got way overweight because of all that crap in my mind until I finally got over it.
Now my wife said I fortunately haven't seen a lot of FTT in my day, not from abuse, anyways.
I'm not familiar with that kind of porn.
uh, boy,
Probably the wrong conversation to have that joke, but
probably. Gold said
failure
parents
to thrive. Okay.
failure to thrive. Yeah. Gold said parents may also unintentionally restrict certain foods, gluten, etc., for their own viewpoints that can affect a child's food ideals growing up.
Oh God, no kidding. With the forced veganism and
Yes.
oh,
It's terrible. Look, you want to have that
balanced
view
nutrition.
that,
Come on.
yes, balance. Research is out there. Carrie said, just a small example of stress. I'm usually in a very good mood. All right. But all I've been doing is studying and more studying, and finally I had to take a break. I was stressing myself out so bad I was being a bitch to everyone. That's
Yeah.
just studying. No, I'm kidding. No, studying is definitely a huge stress factor. I know there's a lot of kids that start abusing prescription drugs like Adderall, Ritalin, and things like that because they're trying to stay awake, they're trying to study, they're trying to focus, they're trying to do all these things. So, stress can lead to substance abuse issues. It can lead to anxiety, depression, things like that.
Well, some tests are weighted so heavily that's like, all right, your final is 50% of your grade. You screw that up, you're done.
Yeah, no
And
matter
people are
what you've
killing
done.
themselves
Yeah,
trying to pass these few tests.
it really is ridiculous.
All right, so now we're coming down to the causes of abuse. I wish I had a
Hold on.
fixed
My
answer.
wife said, "Man, I was a nightmare when I had tests to study for it." You're still a nightmare. Still a nightmare.
So, child abuse is a very complex phenomenon with multiple causes. There's not a single factor that can really be identified as to why some adults behave violently towards children.
I'm gonna pause. I completely forgot to mention this. She mentioned
Hmm.
on Reddit that there was a bunch of students in India committed suicide because of some test taking error. I think it was
Oh, yeah.
19 plus or something like that. That committed suicide.
Yeah, their
Just
grades had tanked and they
yeah,
couldn't deal with it. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
No, it's
nuts.
and then
Carrie
Carrie.
said she drug herself to put her to sleep.
Yeah, but yeah. Anyways, I apologize. That was
No
definitely
worries.
relevant there.
That's all good. So, the World Health Organization and the International Society for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect, ISPCAN, uh, it can identify multiple factors at the level of the individual, their relationships, their local community, and their society at large that combine to influence the occurrence of child treatment. At the individual level, such factors include age, sex, and the personal history. While at the level of society, factors contributing to maltreatment include cultural norms, encouraging harsh physical punishment of children, economic inequality, the lack of social safety nets. WHO and ISPCAN state that the understanding of the complex interplay of various risk factors is vital for dealing with the problem of child maltreatment. Parents who physically abuse their spouses are more likely than others to physically abuse their children, which is kind of obvious in that part. It does happen a lot. However, it's impossible to really whether to know if marital strife is the cause of abuse or if both the marital strife and the abuse are caused by tendencies of the abuser. Sometimes parents set expectations for the child that are clearly beyond the child's capability, and when a parent's expectations are far beyond what is appropriate to the child, for example, preschool children expect to be totally responsible for self care or provision of nutrients, nurturance to parents. The resulting frustration caused by the child's noncompliance is believed to be a function. Uh, to function as a contributory, if not necessarily the cause of child abuse. And one thing that comes to mind with that is the typical stereotype of the Asian parents that think their
Mm-hmm.
kids must absolutely get A's or nothing else,
Right.
and that can put a crippling amount of stress on the kid.
And it is a legit thing, by the way.
Oh,
There is
definitely.
a very strong drive for just pure excellence. It's definitely a cultural thing.
Yeah, and when you're dealing with kids, you can't. An expression that I heard once was, "If you judge a fish by their ability to climb a tree, you're not really getting much out of it." See, your wife just said people should be required to take a parenting class before they can have kids. I really wish that
Yeah.
something was in there. I can't help but see the movie Idiocracy as more of a documentary rather than a comedy these
Right.
days.
Gold said, I think it boils down to more adults, parents, needing mental health services. If parents, adults can have a healthier mental state, then there is less of a risk to pass that down to kids. Now,
Hmm.
you made a slip up when you were trying to say nurturance and you said nutrients. Now, it's funny
Oh
because there
yeah.
are actually, no, you actually brought up a good point following along with this. There are some parents that their stress and anxiety is so crazy, the things that they're dealing with, they get in such a depressive state that there are young kids that literally have to take care of the house and take care of their parents when they shouldn't have to at a really young age, including
Hmm.
feeding them and everything else like that. So while that was a slip, I thought it was good to mention that as well.
It can happen,
Um,
especially, a lot of people get busy and they're very eager for their kids to become self-reliant, and that becomes a push for self-reliance before it's really feasible. It's like, it's one thing for a 13 or 14-year-old to make themselves a sandwich, whatever. When you have a 5-year-old trying to do it, there
yeah,
can be some slippery issues there because
yeah.
they might think, "Oh, I'm grown up now. I'm going to get the sharp knife," and "Oh, I've cut myself now. But my parent can't help me. They're asleep. Oh my God, what do I?" It's really
It's a terrible
it's
road.
speaking of slippery slopes. Yeah, the wife says it's a slippery slope when you try to start talking about controlling people's reproductive choices. Yeah, it's goofy. I mean, you can't really have like a breeding license for people.
Well, I mean, they
You,
are trying to make abortions illegal and everything else like that in some areas. Did you hear they're actually trying to push a thing where it's punishable by death?
oh, that idiot's not going to get traction. Even everyone in Texas thinks he's a moron and he's
Well,
running.
totally. But the mindset of people that they are pushing for things like that. I mean, yeah. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's goofy. I mean, it's on the one hand you can't stop people who shouldn't
Exactly.
have kids,
It said
but on
let's
the
be
other hand,
pro-life and punish abortion by death.
yeah,
Exactly.
he just wanted a publicity's all, and he's an idiot. But on the one hand you get people that are breeding because they're too dumb. On the other hand, you have random people just having a drunken fling, and kids come out of it, and while they keep the kid, then
Well,
they
there's
don't
also a
want the
lack of
kid.
education with when it comes to sex.
Oh, there is.
Yeah,
This country has a real problem, and I might even do a podcast on sex in
I
general.
think we need
Uh,
to be
it'd be a
quite
good topic
honest.
because this country is overly sheltered, and the whole Bible Belt thing, and people just not wanting to
Sex
talk
is
about
out
anything.
there. If you do not
It's gonna
discuss
happen.
this with your kids, don't rely on the school or anything else.
Yeah,
Whatever your religious beliefs or anything else, if you have these discussions, I promise you, in most cases, your child is going to be able to make a more informed
Gold is
decision.
very excited for a sex podcast,
Hello.
but
No,
it's
it's
just
important.
ridiculous.
It is because we need to have these discussions. I wish I had to be honest.
Well, it's because parents are uncomfortable discussing something. They just want to take it off the table, but that's not going to magically stop kids from getting pregnant. It's not going to stop kids from contracting diseases. I mean, for the love of God, it's going to happen. There's not a single entity on earth that's not going to attempt to pursue sex at some point in life.
my wife. I'm going to get
Oh,
myself in trouble for it, but I think we should put birth control in the water, and you only get the antidote if you pass a test. I'm kidding. That wouldn't be safe. She's a
I have had
doctor.
that thought.
Yes, can't medicate the whole populace, but you get my thought. There,
Yeah.
I feel like it's like anything else. I mean, you should be educated with these things. I mean, you
Well,
can't get
and
certain jobs with education, so why should you be having children
right.
without some education? Because that is
And
one hell
as
of a
with
job.
everything else, being past the nose for the studio audience,
Oh.
this just in.
Uh-huh. Breaking news.
Oh, reminder talk to her about son-in-law. Okay,
Oh, okay.
I'll
So
keep it
not
noted.
breaking news.
Not breaking news. Also, fake news. Fake news, everybody.
Fake news. Mary said, I think that's a good idea, Dr. Mrs. Tech. Anyways, we're
It's
going to move
just
along. We'll get back to some more comments here in a bit. We just want to try to keep some things rolling and slightly on schedule today.
sure. All right, so let's see here. Were we with abuse? I forgot where we
You were
were.
on that most acts of physical
Ah,
violence.
got it. All right, so most acts of physical violence against children are undertaken with the intent to punish. And I think most of us here can probably see where this is going. In the United States, interviews with parents reveal that as many as two-thirds of documented instances of physical abuse began as acts of corporal punishment and meant to correct a child's behavior. While a large scale Canadian study found that three-quarters of substantiated cases of physical abuse in children have occurred within the context of physical punishment, Other studies have shown that children and infants who are spanked by parents are several times more likely to be severely assaulted by parents or suffer an injury requiring medical attention. Now, it's very tricky with this one because even my pastor in some of his sermons has talked about his mother. She was an around the world parent, meaning when she spanked you, she went in circles around the world and she prayed, I mean, Jesus, please don't let me kill this child. Because you get to the point with the kids where you've corrected, and you've corrected, and you've corrected, and they still won't listen. And I feel like there's a mixture of the parents not knowing what appropriate next step to take and frustration as to, I have tried everything. We're going to make sure something sticks. And they kind of escalate and they don't know how to make it end. Now, a lot of people take the what I think is the appropriate approach where like with me with my daughter, I haven't had to spank her very much, but I always use my hand so that I know based on how my hand feels roughly what she's feeling. And I'm never, if my hand's still stinging a few hours later, I'll go check on her. Obviously that's never happened, but when you start using items, that's where I feel things can get out of control real quick. Or if you've moved on from trying to hit to, all right, we're going to lock you in a closet for an hour. Well, is there air supply in the closet? What's going on here? I can easily see that getting out of control, and that's not necessarily intended abuse. It's trying to get them to really listen, type of thing.
Now, Mrs. Dex said, seriously, like little Timmy got a D on his test. Do you A, beat him with your favorite cat of nine tails, or B, take away his favorite things, iPad, TV, Xbox, etc.? Jesus.
Well, and see, sometimes parents will start with the okay, your tablets go away,
Hmm.
your coloring books go away, and then you find out that you're trying to pay a bill and your kid stole your last $25. You can't pay that bill. Looking at you. Uh, then suddenly spanking comes right on the table because they put you in a serious bind. It's like you try the simple stuff, and hell, it's not getting in there, type of
Carrie, the
thing.
cat of
So
nine tails, depending on your take, is either a wonderful sex implement or
horrible torture device.
yes. It just really depends on where you are situated with that.
I see. Growing up in the '80s, the thing that we always got with was when you get hit with something, it usually whatever toy was nearby, they would just pick it up and
If
whale you
you
with it. I didn't even.
heard the belt buckle rattle,
Oh yeah,
woo, you were running.
my dad
You
had a
were
belt
running.
that he cut short, so he had the buckle was his grip, went on for about like 12 and a half inches, then cut off at an angle, so he had a nice point on it. And he would just kind of it was both sides
Hmm.
of the belt, so he would get it and just go pop pop, snap that leather, and oh man, another friend of mine,
That makes my
he
ass sting just thinking about it.
he was being a real dick to his parents around the years that Transformers were real popular. And I tell you what, you get hit with a die cast metal Transformer, that kid next Christmas asked for Nerf. Everything Nerf. Nothing hard.
Yeah. Now, studies indicate that such abusive treatment often involves parents attributing conflict to their child's willfulness or rejection, as well as coercive family dynamics and conditioned emotional responses. Factors involved in the escalation of ordinary physical punishment by parents into confirmed child abuse may be the punishing parent's inability to control their anger or judge their own strength, and the parent being unaware of the child's physical vulnerabilities. Children resulting from unintended pregnancies are more likely to be abused or neglected. In addition, unintended pregnancies are more likely than intended pregnancies to be associated with abusive relationships, and there's an increased risk of physical violence during pregnancy. They also result in poorer maternal mental health and lower mother child relationship quality. There is some limited evidence that children with moderate or severe disabilities are more likely to be victims of abuse than non disabled children. Parental mental health has also been seen as a factor towards child maltreatment, which Gold also informed us, eating disorders and everything else. What is going on in chat? Oh boy. Yeah, spondism does get wild. Wow. Oh my god. I'm not even going to read
Yeah.
the rest of that. Now, substance abuse, moving right along, can be a major contributing factor to child abuse. One U.S. study found that parents with documented substance abuse, most commonly alcohol, cocaine, and heroin, were much more likely to mistreat their children and were also much more likely to reject court ordered services and treatments. Probably also going to be poor as hell because let me tell you, that stuff gets expensive after a while. Like, I'd love to know how they just can afford cocaine all the time. Another study found that over 2/3 of cases of child maltreatment involve parents with substance abuse problems. The study specifically found relationships between alcohol and physical abuse, between cocaine and sexual abuse. Parental stress caused by substance increases the likelihood of the minor exhibiting internalizing and externalizing behaviors. Although the abuse victim does not always realize the abuse is wrong, the internal confusion can lead to chaos, and her anger turns to outer frustration. Once aged 17 to 18, drinking and drugs are used to numb the hurt feelings, nightmares and daytime flashbacks. Uh, Acquisitive crimes to pay for the chemicals are inevitable if the victim is unable to find employment. Again, that stuff is not cheap. So it kind of
Yeah.
starts you rolling down a really bad path. It really does.
Having grown up in Miami in the 80s, yeah, if you can't afford cocaine, you steal a lot.
Oh,
Knew
yeah.
plenty of people that were out constantly hawking shit, and none of it was theirs. All right, so now we get to the causes of abandonment. This gets a little more complex than just abuse because it's a little more definitive, but there's a lot of them. So, poverty and homelessness are often causes of child abandonment. People living in countries with poor social welfare systems who are not financially capable of taking care of a child are much more likely to abandon their children because of lack of resources. In some cases, the parents already have a child or children but are unable to take care of another child at the time. I know in India in particular, that's a massive issue. They will just up and sell their kids, or if they have one, if they've had 5 daughters and they finally have a son, well, one of those daughters gets sold off to pay for carrying the son. Real tragic thing. China also, because they had that one child policy for so long that I think has been relaxed. They'll just get rid of their kids until they have their son they want.
Hmm.
That
It's
in
sad.
societies where, oh yeah, it's horrible, definitely horrible. In societies where women are looked down upon for being teenage or single mothers, child abandonment is much more common. There's some, even in 2019, there's some areas where you still get stoned to death if you're found to be pregnant. So if you, for some reason, have to carry to term and can be hidden, you will get rid of that kid. In cases like that, they don't want to; they just want to stay alive.
Wife said there should be a talk on how men are favored and have treated women like crap for eons.
Probably should be one on that. That it's kind of a dual topic because you've. It's let's see. We probably have to do something on not favoritism, but there's a word that's in a definition book somewhere, dictionary. That's the one. Because it goes both ways. There are areas where men are maltreated, and there's areas where, yeah, sexism. That's the word. Hey, look, Doctor Brain, sexism. Sexism
Yes.
kind of covers both sides because there's a lot of stuff that several industries. It's much more common to see the male talking down to female portions, but like being a person who works in payroll, 99% of the people in the offices I go to are women, and they're always shocked that a straight man is doing payroll. It's like, I'm sorry, I know numbers. So you get a lot of comments like that as well. So there's a lot of stuff to go
No
around that.
one
So
has
that might
ever doubted your intelligence there.
the book smarts are on point. The street smarts, let's just move right along.
Yeah, but sexism it's a real thing and it does go both ways, 100%.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's certain industries that you'll definitely see it more common where
Well, even
men,
like with abuse,
yeah.
men don't report rape because
Who's
it
going to
just
believe
doesn't.
them?
Yeah,
And
you
most of
get
the
this like,
time
oh,
it's
you would have
like
had
you're
fun.
complaining, right? Like
Yeah.
you enjoyed it, you know you did. There's definitely skewed perspectives 100% with people not reporting, with men not reporting. Not to diminish or anything else, but I
Oh, it's
feel
hellacious for anyone that goes through it, but
it is.
uh,
But we have to
we got to present
understand.
both sides for
Yeah,
sure.
it's definitely if we do a topic, it's going to have to address both sides of the issue. Um. Oh, hi. Oh, yeah, it's punching bag time.
All right, so children born out of the confines of marriage may be abandoned in a family's attempt to prevent being shamed by their community. And honestly, in 2019, having a kid at any stage has pretty much been covered by all populaces. There shouldn't be shame. There should
Mhm.
just be help.
Yeah.
Um, you've also got the physical disability, mental illness, and substance abuse problems that the parents are facing could lead them to abandon their children. Someone who's not emotionally ready to have a child may not understand that just tossing them aside, leaving them on a doorstep somewhere could. Children that are born with congenital disorders and other health complications, they're really get abandoned a lot. And I feel like this is something hospitals probably see more often as they get wind of something could be wrong with a baby and the parents' demeanor completely shifts. I don't know if the wife has any input on that, especially doing her rounds in the natal type stuff. But when you have someone with a disorder, if the parents don't feel equipped to provide them with the right level of care, they might panic and just get rid of them. And then there's also cultures where the sex of the child is of utmost importance. Hi, China. Parents are more likely to abandon the baby of an undesired sex. Similarly, many people choose to pursue the often controversial opinion of sex selective abortion, which is a thing that China's trying to do. Political conditions like war or displacement of family are also a big problem for abandonment. I feel that one's
Why?
more
Why?
unintentional. You
She
haven't read chat,
throws
have you?
food on my floor to get puppies in.
I applaud you, ma'am. I applaud you.
You know, I am working, right?
Oh, your ratings are going. So with displacement, I mean, if your village is getting actively bombed and you're fleeing and people get separated, I could see a lot of abandonment happening, but I don't think a lot of that's intentional. I think that's just a thing where children may get abandoned just for lack of no one can contact anyone, and how do you seek someone out in a war zone type of thing. One that I do see a lot in the States is incarceration. When they get incarcerated or deported, then it can be abandoned or displaced, even if there's no voluntary relinquishment of any roles. Um, One I see not as much, but I hear about a lot is disownment of a child, which is a form of abandonment entailing ending contact and support for one's dependent. Disownment tends to occur later in a child's life, generally due to a conflict between the parents and the child. But it can occur when the children are so young. Reasons include divorce, discovering true paternity of a child, child's actions being bringing shame to the family, Hyro,
I
most
got a
commonly
puppy.
breaking the law or teenage pregnancy, major religious or
This is
ideological
Moxie, by
differences.
the way.
Oh, there you go, Roxy. Or the most common one recently is identifying as LGBTQ plus. So because someone comes out to their parents, they can get disowned. Better off families that believe their child should be doing better than they are, be it for drug abuse or anything that the parents believe they're not following the right path and career, they can get disowned. They can get kicked out of the house when they're 15 or 16 and they stay with friends. I saw that at high school a lot with private high schools. Parents expect for the money they're paying for you to get the education and go the route they want to go. And if the child disagrees, then they're just kind of tossed to the wolves. Or the very day they turn 18, their parents show up with a bunch of boxes and move them out to the curb, and it's up to them to figure out what to do. It's crazy.
Hold on a second.
Speak of neglect.
Yeah, right?
Let's see what's been chat here.
Anyways, so we're going to move on to some causes of neglect here. There's about to be some in this house. The cause of child neglect complex can be attributed to three different levels: an intrapersonal, and an interpersonal family, and a social economic level. Although the causes of neglect are varied, studies suggest that, amongst other things, parental mental health problems, substance use, domestic violence, unemployment, and poverty are factors which increase the likelihood of neglect. Children that result from unintended pregnancies are more likely to suffer from abuse and neglect. They also are more likely to live in poverty. Neglectful families often experience a variety or a combination of adverse factors. Now, intrapersonal. At the interpersonal level, the discussion around neglectful parents' characteristics often focuses on mothers, reflecting traditional notions of women as primary caregivers for children. Neglectful attributes have included an inability to plan, lack of confidence about the future, difficulty with managing money, emotional immaturity, lack of knowledge of children's needs, a large number of children, being a teenage mother, high levels of stress, and poor socioeconomic circumstances. Mental health problems, particularly depression, have been linked with a parent's inability to meet a child's needs. Likewise, substance misuse is believed to play a crucial role in undermining a parent's ability to cope with parental responsibilities. While the literature largely focuses on mothers, the role of fathers in neglect, as well as the impact of their absence, remains largely unexplored. There's still little known about whether mothers and fathers neglect differently and how this affects children. Similarly, not much is known about whether girls and boys experience neglect differently.
Sorry, I was egging your wife on. Let's see here. Interpersonal and family. So the interpersonal family level, a significant number of neglectful families are headed by a lone mother or have a transient male. Unstable and abusive relationships have been mentioned as increasing the risk of child neglect. The impact of living with domestic violence on children frequently includes either direct violence or forced witnessing of abuse, which is potentially very damaging to children. While the UK Department of Health connects children's exposure to domestic violence to parents' failure to protect them from emotional harm, the notion of failure to protect has been challenged as it focuses primarily on the responsibility of the abused parent. usually the mother, who is often herself at significant risk. A recent reform to the Domestic Violence Crime and Victims Act of 2004 has introduced a new offense of causing or allowing the death of a child or vulnerable adult, thus reinforcing the notion of failure to protect. Research on domestic violence, however, has consistently shown that supporting non-abusive, non-abusive parent is good child protection. There is some indication of the cyclical and intergenerational nature of neglect. A study on childhood abuse and the mother's later ability to be sensitive to a child's emotions showed that mothers with a self reported history of physical abuse had higher indications of insensitivity and lack of attunement to infants' emotional cues than mothers who have no history of abuse. Although literature suggests that neglected parents may have been affected adversely by their own past experiences, more research is really needed to explore the link between past experiences of maltreatment and neglectful parenting behaviors. Alcohol and drug abuse in caregivers are an important risk factor for child maltreatment. For recurrent child maltreatment, after accounting for other known risk factors, an increased risk appears to be similar between alcohol and drug abuse.
Now we're going to move on to the socioeconomic. At the social economic level, the association between poverty and neglect has frequently been made. A study of the maltreatment of children by the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children supports the association between neglect and the lower socioeconomic class. U.S. studies have shown that less affluent families are more likely to be found to maltreat their children, particularly in the form of neglect and physical abuse, than affluent families. Some argue that many forms of physical neglect, such as inadequate clothing, exposure to environmental hazards, and poor hygiene, may be directly attributed to poverty, whereas others are more cautious in making a direct link. Studies have shown that parents on a low socioeconomic level are less likely to purchase resources needed for their children, which makes them experience school failure at a more frequent level. While poverty is believed to increase the likelihood of neglect, poverty does not predetermine neglect. Many low income families are not neglectful but provide loving homes for their children. However, when poverty coexists with other forms of adversity, it can negatively impact parents' ability to cope with stressors and undermine their capacity to adequately respond to their child's needs. It can also mean that parents who want to work are faced with the choice between being unemployed and leaving their children at home. Some argue that the relationship between child neglect and poverty should be seen as circular and interdependent. Where caregiver alcohol abuse is identified, children are significantly more likely to experience multiple incidents of neglect compared with children where this is not identified, as were children where other family risk factors, including markers of socioeconomic disadvantage, are found.
Now we come to how to report child abuse, neglect, or abandonment. First off, if you or someone else is in immediate or serious danger, by all means call 911. Otherwise, if you suspect there is a child being abused or neglected, or if you yourself are a child who is being maltreated, contact your local child protective service office or law enforcement agency so a professional can assess your situation. Many states have toll free numbers to call to report suspected child abuse or neglect.
The National Child Abuse Hotline is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with professional crisis counselors who have access to a database of 55,000 emergency, social service, and support resources. All calls are anonymous. Contact them at 1 800 4A Child. That's 1 800 422 4453. You don't need to be 100% sure that a child is being abused or neglected to talk with someone. Give a complete, honest description of what you know. This may be a difficult conversation to have, but remember the reason you're having it is to keep someone safe.
And absolutely anyone can report suspected child abuse or neglect. Reporting abuse or neglect can protect a child and get help for a family. It could even save a child's life. In some states, anybody who suspects child abuse or neglect is legally required to report. Also, it needs to be said unless abuse is physically happening in front of you, be extremely careful of acting out on your own. Despite any laws that an abuser is breaking, you can and will be charged with assault if you physically assault someone you suspect of abuse. Let the professionals handle this outside of a direct physical emergency in front of you. And I can tell you from firsthand experience as a security guard, you can have a man and a woman fighting in a parking lot. You can have a woman protecting her child from a man in a parking lot. You step in and get involved, both those bastards are going to turn right on you.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why people are wired that way, but you have to take the
It's
approach
like we can
of,
attack each other, but you can't attack them.
yeah, it does not make any mental sense whatsoever, but you have to be very careful to not come in as a third party without a plan or some training. And even if you're trained, you kind of almost have to take the approach of not my circus, not my monkeys, unless if you're seeing there's clearly the guy's pummeling her or something like that, you can get involved and there's not going to be a ramification. But if it's just a lot of name calling, throwing things, and it's kind of that gray area, call the cops, observe as much as you can, tell them when they get there what's going on, let them deal with it. They're equipped for it.
Child abuse in all its forms is despicable, 100%. There isn't a single person we know who doesn't want children to lead happy and fulfilling lives. Furthermore, nobody wants to look at a trusted family member and friends as potential abusers, but you must be vigilant for odd changes in behavior, unusual information. Question to yourself anything you find out of the norm and consider seriously if you should be alarmed before brushing something off as you being silly or blown out of proportion. Additionally, there's a high burden on parents to raise good children who grow into good teenagers and transition into good adults. However, the fine line of punishment is something that needs to be forefront in your mind. Children need to respect your authority and learn proper behavior and manners, but they should not disproportionately fear you. Constantly reevaluate your methods and look at your actions critically to ensure you're not crossing a line. So basically, it's one of those things. Um, Parenting is an ever evolving thing. It's never going to stay the same. Punishments are never going to stay the same.
Mhm.
The way, discipline, none of it stays the same. Their attitudes, their likes, dislikes, the things they're into. You always have to look at these things and be like, all right, is what I'm doing being effective? Am I just getting angry about something? Let's face it, we've all been in that situation where somebody is constantly doing something you just absolutely can't stand. You've asked them repeatedly, don't do this, don't do this. You need to take a step back before you say something, lash out, or anything else, and realize, all right, maybe I'm just really angry about this, and whatever I may do could be causing harm. So keep that in mind.
Definitely. And situational awareness as a whole is really not where it needs to be in this country. As an adult or even as a teenager, you're responsible to ensure that your awareness in regards to children and their care is heightened and you do not miss obvious signs. Drop it unannounced at your kid's daycare from time to time to pay a visit. Use cameras to monitor your babysitters. These days, they're very inexpensive. You can pick them up just about anywhere. And Amazon delivers all over the globe. It might take 7 years to get to Hawaii, but otherwise, it'll get in
Poor
pretty quick.
IKEA.
Yeah, and then talk with your kids. Talk with any kids that come over to spend the night at your house. Get to know your kids' friends. Get to know how they act, and be aware if someone who's happy-go-lucky comes over one day real quiet and has slightly darker eyes or something. Just be paying enough attention that you can see when something is outside of the norm. Children themselves are not good at understanding when secrets are okay or when they should tell someone that something has happened. Children are not good at understanding that some situations are not their fault. You are the one who needs to be aware enough to understand when something is not okay. You are the one that needs to step up and say something so that a child can get out of a situation that they're in and get the help that they actually do.
Anyways, it's definitely been a troubling topic to discuss, but we do appreciate everyone for joining us, and hopefully, all of us are coming out of this with some new knowledge, new ways to understand what's going on, and what we can do to help. Just as a reminder, as well, if you need to contact somebody in the U.S. at least, the National Child Abuse Hotline, again, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 55,000 different point of contact for emergency social service and support resources. The number for them is 1-800-422-4453. So don't be afraid if you legitimately, again, you don't have to be 100%. If there's a doubt in your mind, I'd rather be the asshole who calls in and causes a little bit of an inconvenience, rather than be the person that just shrugged it off and then a child or something or is getting hurt.
Mhm.
So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and don't forget to check the Discord server, just linked in chat, to vote on future topics. Although I think we're changing up for next week, we're going to be talking about
Personal finance.
personal finances. We got some other things that are going on, so we're just going to go ahead and go with the second highest voted one. But if you do have any suggestions, Mir, by all means, please provide the UK version for that. If there's a number for that you want to provide, by all means do. So give us your suggestions and ideas, and we'll definitely add on to that. I believe after next podcast, we'll actually have a new list coming up of things to vote on. Please comment on topics. We love getting ideas. Sex education, I think, is one we can add to our list now. Is that binary? It's got an 8 in there, not binary. She said Childline is 080011. Too many ones there. 11.
Or she fell on the phone.
Or she fell on the phone. So if you're in the UK or in that area, you can use that number to get in contact with somebody. Anyways, again, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful. There's been a lot of great discussions. I think, great. Do you have anything else you want to add there, Top?
No, I think we covered everything. Star Trek or Starfire Kid said
Star Trek.
overprescribing. That's actually not a bad idea. There's both overprescription and
Yes.
underability of doctors both overprescribe medication and they're legally blocked from prescribing medication. Both of them I see as issues because my wife deals with a lot of medical stuff and she can only go to certain doctors.
Sometimes you go to places, they'll
that
throw
shit
it
gets
at you like
expensive.
it's Tic Tacs. Like, here,
Yeah, I mean,
take all this.
why can't I find one of those doctors for her? Because it's like every time she needs a prescription filled, okay, 150 copay for that specialist, 150 for this specialist. It's like I get that the opioid crisis is a thing and prescribing the problem, but it's like I think there should be more of a treat this at the doctor level. If you find a doctor that's being a bit of a dick, cut his license, do something, rather than stopping doctors who actually know what they're doing, who actually could do some stuff from being beneficial to their patients and causing more visits, which causes more co-pays. It's ridiculous the amount that you have to spend to get the medicine to keep a person alive.
All right. Well, with that being said, I want to say thank you all once again for joining and everything else like that. If you haven't hit that follow button, by all means do. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you probably should. You get some wonderful emotes, which Top Dog may be able to demonstrate one of them. You'll also get a special little tag if you joined a Discord, which Top should have linked. Yes, he did.
Yep, I did.
So these are the cool little emotes. There will be more added on down the road. So if you ever feel like doing that, because remember, any of the money that comes in for the streams, it goes right back into the streams.
Our pocket, I mean.
Yeah. Thankfully, he does not handle the money on this end. No, it goes into games. It goes into adding new graphics and things like that to bring things along to a more professional level, especially when it comes to the podcast and the gaming streams and everything else. It also goes into the YouTube channel, which with writing season being here, there's going to be a lot more of that going on.
Yeah, remember professional level if the brown chicken, brown cow idea I had takes off.
It is. I am definitely doing that, by the way. There's going to be a beautiful little update for those of you who watch the gaming streams. Stay tuned for that. But anyways, whatever support it is, whether it's a follow, a small donation from bits to subscriptions, I want you to know that I greatly appreciate it. I know Top does. We enjoy doing what we do here. We enjoy the time that we spend with y'all. The only other favor that I could ask is if you really enjoy the channel, you enjoy the content, please spread the word, tell your friends, retweet, share on Facebook if you see a post that we do. Get the word out. The more people out there, the bigger discussions we can have, the more education we can kind of help spread out there, and definitely kind of hit our goal out there. Anyways, thank you all for joining again. Y'all take it easy. Have a great night. Say goodnight, Top.
Good night, Top.